Hi, everyone. My name is Gene Kim. I've been studying high-performing technology organizations since 1999. I'm the author of the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, The Unicorn Project. Today on this show, we'll talk about digital disruption and what every business leader needs to know. Stay tuned.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron, he's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives. Let me ask you, what do you need to do to uplevel your leadership? It's been said that we are living in a future that was beyond our own imaginings, even as little as 20 years ago. But the question is, how can business and technology co-create a future together? Well, stay tuned because you're about to discover just that. I'm your host, Dov Baron. I am the Dragonist, and I'm here to assist you tapping into the one thing in your business that changes everything by transforming meaning into action. To find out more, you can simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. This episode of Leadership and Loyalty is brought to you in part by Magcast. Imagine having your own industry magazine. What would that do for your authority? Whether you're a coach, a content expert, or an emerging brand, it's hard to stand out from the crowd. So what if there was a proven way to increase both your perceived authority and your professional status in the eyes of your market and to be able to do it all at once? Well, there's a way to go from being invisible to getting meetings with anyone. To find out more, go to magcast.co. That's magcast.co, where first-time publishers create thriving magazine businesses. Remember, you can chat about this show or any past episode by finding us on our LinkedIn or Facebook groups by looking for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. If you're a new listener, new viewer, I want to thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in. We're about to go full Monty. And as always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you tune into podcasts. We always appreciate you going there, keeping us relevant by rating, review, and leaving and subscribing and sharing the show with everybody you know. If you're a regular listener, a big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast globally for Fortune 500 listeners with potential reach of 2.5 to 4 million listeners for every single show. We're honored and grateful to be cited by Inc.com as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. And if you want to listen to us through Alexa or Google Home, just simply say, play Dov Baron Podcast. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Even if you consider yourself a bit of a Luddite, we'll try that again. Even if you consider yourself to be a bit of a Luddite, there's a pretty good chance that as you're listening or watching this, you are interfacing with the technology that might have seemed even impossible 10 years ago. But business and technology have become inseparable. When the pandemic of 2020 showed up, many people were forced to use technology they'd been avoiding. But the questions are, first, how can business and technology co-create the future together? And secondly, what are the myths we've been holding on to that have got in the way of us bringing business and technology together in an effective, progressive, and co-creative way? Well, let's find out together, because my guest on this episode is Gene Kim. He is a multi-award-winning CTO, researcher, and author, and has been studying high-performance technologies in organizations since 1999. He was the founder and CTO of Tripwire, you may have heard of them, for about 13 years. He is a Wall Street Journal best-selling author of 6 books, including the allegorical tale, The Phoenix Project. Since 2014, he has been the founder and organizer of Devops, Enterprise Summit, studying the technology and transformations of large, complex organizations. In 2007, Computer World added Gene to its 40 innovative IT people to watch under the age of 40 list. And he was named by Computer Science Outstanding Alumnus by Purdue University for achievements in leadership and profession. Gene Kim is a researcher who has been on a quest to understand what makes great technology technology organizations, just that. Great. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome top 40, under 40 innovative IT people to work for and author of the Unicorn Project, Mr. Gene Kim.
Oh my gosh, Dov, great to be here. And 40 under 40. Holy cow, that was a long time ago.
It's 20 minutes now. It was about when I was at the 50 under 50. That was a while
That's
ago,
right.
too. There you go.
Yeah, it's tough to peak early in life.
There you go. Well, it's good to have you here, Gene. Thank you so much for joining us. Where I always like to start is in a world full of influence and, quote, people who like to call themselves influencers. I believe we're all impacted and influenced by all kinds of people, and we all usually have these sort of iconic heroes that we look at. But they're usually people who've had massive impact and influence on our lives who are often people we don't know, as in the rest of the world doesn't know, and the rest of the world might not suspect. Who is someone who we might not know or may not consider who's been a major influence on you and on your leadership?
Oh, for sure. You know, the person that I've admired for decades, in fact, really shaped the trajectory of my career was a physicist and a researcher named Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt. And so he wrote this famous book called The Goal. It was a novel about a manufacturing plant manager who had to fix his cost and due date issues in 90 days. Otherwise, they shut the plant down. And you know, when I read this book in 1997, I had never worked in a manufacturing plant. I'd certainly never managed one, but I knew reading this book, you know, it was so clear that, you know, what he was teaching was relevant to all sorts of work, including technology work. And that seemed like a very preposterous, you know, proposition. And you know, that actually sort of set a quest for me to eventually rewrite the goal, but for the technology context. And I remember in 2004 emailing him with a friend and co-author, and him actually responding and taking a phone call from us. And so that was an act of kindness and set of teachings that you know, how that changed my life, and so I have such appreciation for that. And when he passed away a couple of years ago, that was a real loss to the world.
Did you get to know him at all?
You know, I probably had 5 interactions with him, and got to see you know, his relentless crusade to try to bring more scientific thinking to how we lead organizations. But I think what he's most famous for is really bringing lean to a generation of business leaders. I think most people who have taken an MBA course or studied operations research read that book, and so it just really became a shared experience through a story that you know, millions of people experience in a common way to express and articulate ideas.
Before you read that book and obviously had your interactions with him, were you know, because you're a tech guy, and this is old world technology called a book/novel. You know, were you that guy too before as well? Were you a fictional reader before?
You know, no, in fact, in some ways, he actually inspired me to really discover that the way I self-identify is primarily as a researcher. You know, I love, I think like you, kind of the puzzle of, you know, what makes great people great, kind of what, how much of it is environmental, how much of it is who they are, how much of it can be taught. And so, you know, he was a physicist by training, but I think what he really taught me was the power of stories. I think it has been well known for millennia that the best way to get the mirror neurons to fire in someone else is through stories. Our whole brains are almost engineered to receive stories. And you know, I think that was made the book so successful. And I think the other thing that made you know, the challenge that became evident was, you know, in the goal, the type of work was really about manufacturing. You know, I think the saying goes, these are people who work with their hands, not their heads, right? And so it was really on the surface preposterous that, you know, there was anything relevant there for knowledge work, and yet I think that the teachings and the principles, you know, in lean, in what Dr. Goldratt was teaching, are as relevant, maybe even more relevant to technology work, and especially when you're talking about digital disruption, when business and technology must co-create the future together. You know, the consequences of screwing that up are not just one manufacturing plant, but potentially the future of the entire company,
and actually potentially damage to the planet.
Oh, so, for sure.
You know, and it's interesting. The reason I'm asking that is because the Unicorn Project and the new book, but The new book, the Unicorn Project, and your previous one, the Phoenix Project, those are allegorical. They are, business fables. So I'm assuming that comes from your inspiration from the goal, the book, The Goal. So why? I mean, you are a researcher. You said that you claim that first. You're a researcher. You're a tech guy. Why use an allegory? I mean, I know you get now about the neurons, but was that did you originally think about, I'm going to write a tech book, or was it the goal that said, no, we really need to write a fable?
Yeah, I think the other inspiration for me is another author I admire is Patrick Lencioni, who wrote another famous book called Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and many other books. But boy, I can tell you, I remember reading that on an airplane, and must have been, again, 20 years ago. And I remember the feeling of reading that book, and like I had to put the book down a couple of times because the feelings were of like almost fear. He described so accurately what we were going through, in that stage of this company I was with, Tripwire, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so I think for something as elusive as technology, in terms of, I think every business leader can have an experience of, projects that are tens of millions of dollars, maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet getting horrendous outcomes. It's a complex subject, and it really does take a narrative business fable format to be able to sort of explore it in sufficient detail and all the complexities to really evoke that feeling of like, holy cow, this is me, right? And to be able to paint both sides and both perspectives of this kind of failed marriage, and to be able to get both sides to the table. So, I think for something where an issue that's been struggled with for so long, it almost does take that format to be able to paint a picture to evoke that reaction from both sides.
So why did you choose that title? Because, I mean, I can certainly go into why I think it was, because we're all talking about unicorns, and not as in the horses with horns, but in a very different way. And technology seems to be the place we look for unicorns. Is that the reason?
Yes. That's part of it for sure. Yeah, it was part of it was baked into the Phoenix Project. They had named this, what rescued the Phoenix Project was this Unicorn Project. But I think there was another element to that as well. And so if you take a look at digital disruption, so much of the principles and practices were really born out of the tech giants, the Facebook, Amazons, Netflix, Googles, Microsofts. And so over the last 20 years, they've really transformed how technologists work.
Yeah.
And what I find so exciting is that these principles and practices are now being diffused through the rest of the economy, so that the largest brands across every industry vertical are using those learnings and using it to survive and win in the marketplace. And so that's been my area of passion of study for now 7 years, studying how these very courageous technology leaders are essentially overthrowing an ancient, powerful order, often without permission, to help their organization survive. And that's the people I've studied in the Devops Enterprise Summit. And I cannot tell you how much I admire what they've done. In fact, the whole book is really an homage to their achievements.
Mm-hmm. But in many ways, we balance on a razor's edge with that, because many of those. I mean, I was speaking about this with another high-profile leader last week, and we were talking about, the great overthrow of the corner store was the big box store. And the great overthrow of the big box store has been Amazon. And each one of those levels has been argued about monopolies and destruction of really entrepreneurial capitalism. And, we know the company that did the best of all companies during this COVID quarantine was Amazon. Jeff Bezos didn't need another couple of billion, but he certainly got them. So talk to us about that edge, because, this is the people you're admiring, but at the same time, there is, like I said, there's that very much a razor's edge there.
Oh, for sure. In fact, I love the way you verbalize that. In fact, the academic authority I admire who studied the space is Dr. Carlotta Perez. She's now at the London School of Economics. And she said that if you take a look at the other previous revolutions, right? Whether it's the age of steam, the age of oil, the age of heavy engineering, each time there was a mode of production that was made immensely cheaper, and it drove, this happens every 50, 70 years. And each time you have two distinct phases, what they call the first place, the installation period, where it is a period of incredible creative destruction, right? So if you take a look at the dominance of Amazon and Apple and Facebook and Google, I mean, I think you see this, and I think that is exactly what you're alluding to. So those companies make up 20% of the market cap of the Fortune 500. But what comes next after what she calls the turning point is what she calls a deployment age. And this is where that mode of production then becomes adopted and used by every industry vertical. And I think that's what we're seeing now. And so 100 years ago, there were 300 car startups in Detroit, right? Most of whose names we wouldn't even recognize. No. And so as much wealth as was created 100 years ago, the real wealth was created after World War II. It was the automobile, yes, but in combination with the interstate highway system, in combination with revolution of supply chains. That's where the real wealth was created, and that also became a period of great redistribution of wealth, where we shrunk the rich-poor gap, and so there were a lot of societal injustices that were fixed as well. So I'm incredibly optimistic that the story doesn't end with Amazon winning, right? It is the best is yet to come, and I think that's kind of the stage that's going to be set over the next 50 years.
So give us some seeds of hope with that, Gene. I mean, where do you see that? Because, as I said, it's clear that Amazon has dominance and it is hailed as the destroyer of small business. And then you've got on top of that, you've got, like you talked about, the other tech giants, whether that's Google, who are also YouTube, and a bunch of others, and all the Microsoft and all these big organizations that seem to be swallowing up and consuming. Talk to us about the other side, that second phase, because I know a lot of people, particularly entrepreneurial people, are saying, or even businesses that are maybe even under 10 million, are saying, will we even be here in 10 years? Will we even be here in 5 years if these giants keep gobbling up and there is no monopoly law that can stop them?
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's two data points I would bring to bear. One is there's a study from Goldman Sachs that plotted the market cap of Walmart versus Amazon. And on the x-axis was the number of years after their IPO. And what's amazing is that the curves are almost exactly the same. So in other words, Amazon is no more disruptive than Walmart was back in the 50s and 60s. And so that's kind of nice, right? It says that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think the other thing that makes me so hopeful is that you don't have to be a Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google to win in the marketplace when the medium is digital, because the cost of the cost of the barrier to entry and the capital requirements are so low. And so when you talk about all these exciting startups, Instagram being acquired for $1 billion by Facebook, that was 10 engineers. Pokemon Go, the fastest property to 1 billion users, that was 25 engineers, right? So I think what's good for Amazon also good for the rest of us. And I think the best verbalization of this came from Rupert Murdoch. He said, we're living in a world that's moving very fast, and it's not big beats small anymore. It's fast beats slow. And so, we are now living in a playing field that is unprecedentedly equal, where anybody can challenge the incumbents. So, I do believe that. And I think, I think the other thing that comes to mind is these organizations, whether it's Capital One or Target or, these organizations that are using the same practices that the tech giants are, they are winning in the marketplace. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that when every engineer is as productive as any engineer inside of the tech giants, that will create trillions of dollars of economic value per year. And so that, when you talk about that much economic value creation, things that seem impossible now will be easily attainable within decades.
That's interesting. It's a good way to look at it. But at the center of everything you've just said is the developer, the programmer. And we know that programming, even in a non-COVID time, can be a pretty isolating thing. Very often, developers' day is spent in deep concentration in front of the computer screen, isolated from humanity. And we also know that developer burnout is a very real thing. And a lot of the research that's been done on that is that developers are almost treated like fuel, like you just throw another log on the fire until it burns out.
Or throw another pizza underneath the door, right?
Yeah,
And,
it's just like, yeah. So talk to us about that side of it, which is the sort of boots on the ground side of developing, because we're talking about being in business and technology together, but the glue that brings them together is this developer programmer who is used as fuel. So they're almost the factory workers of today, right?
No, absolutely. And I think this is probably what is most challenging for senior business leaders. I think what has been a huge mystery for me over the years is how do we take these incredibly successful business leaders who have all the right training, who have all the right uh, fundamental kind of behavioral norms that they radiate trust, they're authentic, they have great judgment, they know how to empower people. Why, if you put them into a context where they win or die by the technology that they create, why are they so unsuccessful so much of the time? And there was a great McKinsey study that discussed digital disruption, and they said of the $1.2 trillion spent over the last 5 years, 90% of it has been wasted. So that's $900+ billion of investment that didn't get a return. And I think it comes to that exact observation: is how do we fully enable these developers to bring their best to work? And I think there's one school of thought that it says that this is a solitary activity. They shouldn't be interrupted. We know the cost of multitasking. And yet I think the other side shows is that there's a lot more required than that, that the creation, whether it's through coding or technology, is inherently a social activity. It requires conversation and interaction that does take, constant feedback, whether it's from their collaborators, their peers, the customer. And that is a whole different way of working than the way most of us were trained in terms of how we manage teams or how we manage managers. Very different than the way we've been trained for the last 50, 100 years. And
well,
I think
certainly we've been trained in the last 50, 100 years to be conveyor belt workers. And then we saw companies like Google create open platform where people could speak and collaborate and work together. And then the backlash of that is nobody gets shit done because everybody's being interrupted, right? So, what is that, in your research, because I know you love to call yourself a researcher first. So in your research, what is that medium, that middle ground between I need to put my headphones on and shut up and don't talk to me, and I'm in this deep, deep space and I don't want to be interrupted, it can't be interrupted, and also the need for collaboration. Now that in and of itself, fine, we're Google, but we're not Google. We're just an average company operating on a, and $2 million a year, income, not, an expenditure. So how do we operate? How do we create that balance? Without burning everybody out.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things I'm most professionally proud of is this 6-year research project I was a part of called the State of Devops report. And so I worked with a researcher named Dr. Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, and we benchmarked over 36,000 organizations over 6 years. And what we found was that certain practices were required to enable great outcomes. And it didn't matter what industry vertical they were in. It didn't even matter what company size they were in, profit, not for profit. And it was just astounding. And you could break it into what cultural norms were present in the organization, what architecture did they work within, and what sort of technical practices did they use in their daily work. And I think the one thing that was one of the biggest surprises to me was around architecture. And it really was, to what degree are teams able to do what they need to do without a lot of communication and coordination with people outside of their team? They don't need permission. They don't need meetings. And it really is, it really does indicate to what extent does leadership enable teams to be able to be productive, in independently. So Amazon has a notion of 2 pizza teams, right? They are all able to do what the customer wants without having to get permission from anyone else. And I think in most technology organizations that have been around for decades, say 30, 40 years, we have the exact opposite, where in order to get even the smallest thing done, you have to bring in 20, 30, 40 other people, right? And all of them can say no, right? They all have to prioritize together, schedule together, deconflict and so forth. So I loved, it was actually in your last interview, right? You talked about sort of the leadership's goal for simplicity and locality. I think that is exactly what is missing in so many organizations. And so I think that is something that every business leader does understand, is how do you decompose work so that, teams can actually get work done without being entangled, and coupled to everybody else.
And that, of course, naturally brings us to this place of, in your research, what did you find to be, what leadership traits are common among these high-performing leaders and leaders in an industry?
Oh, wow. What a great question. In fact, in 2017, we set out to answer that, right? We wanted to understand, to what degree does leadership matter? And we use this model called the Transformational Leadership Model. And it's really 5 domains. We asked 15 questions along that. And, one element is vision. To what extent does that leader understand the grandest visions of the organization? To what degree can they get relevant to those, to help with the achievement of the most important things? The second one was intellectual stimulation. To what degree does the leader challenge basic assumptions of how we do work? In other words, just because we did it 20 years ago doesn't mean that it's necessarily the best way to do things today. The third is inspirational communication. To what degree can they create pride in people's work, right? To what degree can they create coalitions around potentially something that's very disruptive? And supportive leadership and personal recognition. And what we found was that in these high performers, if you take the bucket with the lowest degree of reported transformational leadership behaviors, they're only 1/2 as likely to be high performers. So it just shows that leaders are important, but it's not just leadership, right? You take a bunch of leaders, put them together, without teams and without great practices, they're just a bunch of people giving PowerPoint presentations to each other, right? So there's something very deeply satisfying about that finding.
Right. So just coming to it, what would you, is it those 5 areas when I say the leadership traits that are most common in high performers? Is it those 5 areas of transformational leadership?
Yeah, that's what the research seems to suggest. And I think, I was talking to one of the co-authors of one of my favorite books, Team of Teams, David Crossman. And he brought up another set of characteristics that really resonated with me, because I see them in this DevOps enterprise community, this community of courageous technology leaders and their business peers. And he brought up words like self-awareness, their ability to connect, the ability to be predictable, right, in stressful situations, the need for constant learning. And I think what is amazing is that when you look at the pioneers, both in technology leaders and business leaders, you find both of these kind of characteristics where, I think if we picture the successful people we've encountered in our lives who have influenced us, I think these are the characteristics that, at least for me, shine through clearly.
Yeah, I agree. Now, in your book, you outline these 5 ideals, and you talk about the importance of these. You and I talked about them last time, not all of them, but I touched on them. I think, when we look at these common traits of high-performing leaders, we've also got to look at the environment that creates these 5 ideals. So let's just sort of start walking through these a little bit. And there's one particular one I think we need to come back to. So let's just go over those first.
For sure. Yeah, the first, so these were really meant to be the notions that I found to be very important over the last, for at least 5 years. The first ideal is locality and simplicity. And so the notion that really came up that we talked about earlier was to what degree can we divide up work in a way where people can get stuff done? There's a metric I love that we call the lunch factor. To get something important done, how many people do you need to take out to lunch? Is it the Amazonian ideal of the 2 pizza team where you don't need to buy pizzas for anyone outside your team? They can get done, things done right away. In the not ideal case is you have to buy pizzas for everyone in the building. You have to schedule lunch with 40 different people, right, to get permission, to get approvals, to get reviews. And so That's the first ideal. Second ideal is what I think the outcomes are, especially for developers, which is focus, flow, and joy. And well, one of my favorite books is by Dr. Csikszentmihalyi. He wrote one of my favorite books, which is Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. He gave what I think is one of the best TED Talks ever. And he describes that feeling when we're getting so much enjoyment and fulfillment out of our work, we lose track of time, maybe even sense of self, right? And I think, we do things right. That is, we create the conditions where people can get that state where we're really bringing our best to work. And these are things that drive up things that every leader cares about: employee engagement, employee retention, a feeling of pride in the work we do. The third ideal is improvement of daily work. Just states that improvement of daily work is even more important than daily work itself. So the most famous example of that is the Toyota andon cord. That in Toyota, if everyone's trained to pull the cord, if anything goes wrong, and that actually stops the entire assembly line, and that's pulled 3,500 times a day, typically in a typical plant. The fourth ideal is psychological safety. Google, in their multi-year study, trying to understand what makes great teams great, the top factor was psychological safety, as measured by to what degree do people on a team feel safe to say what they really think, to say no without fear of ridicule or blame, or made to feel stupid. And the fifth ideal is customer focus. So to what degree are we creating lasting, durable business advantage in our daily work that customers are willing to pay us for, as opposed to context. That's everything else. So those are the things that really, in my research, I want to convey and explore in the Unicorn Project.
So let's there's a whole bunch of those that I could just love to jump in on, but just for the consideration of time, let's go back to two of them. Let's start with psychological safety, because I think that is so desperately misunderstood, right? People, will say things like, well, I don't want to be anybody's therapist. Nobody's suggesting you be anybody's therapist. Psychological safety, you mean I can never tell anybody off? I can never hold anybody accountable. I feel like I'm dealing with children. We hear all these things. I know, because I'm a consultant, I'm a strategist in that world. I hear these things. So when you're talking about psychological safety and the importance for people to know that their voice will be heard, which is certainly very important, what I'm really more interested in is the practicality of it, Gene. How do we make that practically possible for a leader today to say, okay, here's what you need to do to make it psychologically safe for your people?
This is something I think is so important. I think is when you talk about how do we build systems that are more than just factory lines that have, I think dominated the last century. It really is, how do we empower the frontline worker to get what they need done. And so when a problem shows up, they are the world's best expert in understanding that problem, right? Just if I had a heart pains right in that moment, I am the world's best expert on reporting what exactly are the systems. And if I go into a hospital, then I can tap other experts. And I think psychological safety is so key to that. So how? And I think we've all seen leaders who are just very, very good at that. They talk about the one thing that matters in monthly town hall meetings. They have a mindset of guiding and enabling and removing obstacles. They want to hear bad news. They want to hear about problems because they know that if it's not safe to share bad news, those will get suppressed or maybe extinguished, right? And it really is about how do you find those small problems early before they become huge problems or even catastrophic problems. So I think it is, a lot of it is set by the leader, but then you also need, we don't want to over glamorize the leaders, right? There's an equal responsibility for the team members to preserve it. So much of psychological safety is fragile. It can be destroyed because of someone's in a bad mood or they're scarred by some event in their past that's fleeting. And so I think it's all about how do we elevate these behaviors we want to model and celebrate.
Yeah, because that's the question for me with my psychology background is psychological safety is so subjective.
Yeah.
so subjective that it in the PC world we live in, which is in many ways a snowflake world where anybody can be upset in any second, it can feel, I know because I've spoken to leaders, it feels like it's impossible. I mean, I'm trying to create psychological safety, but if I breathe in the wrong direction, I'm going to get my leg slapped and could end up in court. And, you know, everybody wants autonomy, but some people are idiots, right? They don't know anything about the subject they're talking about, you know, and they just need a voice.
Mm. Yeah, so let me give you two examples that really
Thank you.
helped frame it for me. One of them, there was this ritual that was written up in the Harvard Business Review about something done at BMW. So the problem they wanted to solve was if you have a project that's not working out so well, how do you find that out early so that you can terminate the project and so you can reallocate the capital to a potentially other bet you want to make in the marketplace? And what they found was that senior leaders, and it almost was worse the more senior you got, was that they were afraid of the stench of failure. So what they did was they had a monthly ritual where they would celebrate the killing of a project. The leader would come up and say, here's what we thought, here's a bet we made, here's what went wrong, and here's why we are ending the project, and here's what we're going to enable by releasing those funds, right? And it became something you celebrate, not something you hid. And there's another Harvard Business Review article about the culture of learning at Booking.com, where they really are building a culture of experimentation, where anybody can do an experiment. They can leverage a whole bunch of internal consultants to perform experiments, so that you can see what do we present to the user to maximize, conversion rates or revenue or yield, whatever, and you share the results, whether it worked or not. The failures are as important as the successes, and I think that is what you see in these high-performing organizations, where everybody's empowered to make bets, do experiments, to do what's right for the customer. And I think those are the big things that we care about, and I think that's what absolutely requires a sense of psychological safety, that everyone's permitted to make mistakes.
I mean, it's one of the things that everybody throws around now is like, you got to fail forward, fail faster, failure is good. No, it's not. It sucks. When you're in it, it sucks, yes. Right? I mean, it's a nice theory, but the truth is, the matter is, when you've invested in something emotionally, psychologically, energetically, as well as financially, and it fails, it sucks. Yeah. And I think that that's an important piece of that process, is to acknowledge that it sucks.
Yes.
It's like I was talking to a friend recently about death, and we were saying that this old ideal of the Italian mama who wears black until she dies because her husband died when she was 25. And and she's been walking around in black. That's a little on the heavy side. On the other side of it is the polar is, oh, well, let's just celebrate the person's life and think about all those things. And none of those things are really honoring of the truth. Right. And I think that the honoring of the truth in failure is, it sucks. What can we learn? It sucks. What can we do next? It's not one or the other. It's actually both that creates the emotional psychological safety to then evolve from it.
Yeah. Oh, that is such a great point. In fact, I think the other aha moment I had was that it's not about being nice. No. In fact, in some ways, it requires a discipline and a pursuit of excellence that is much more difficult than just doing things the way we've always done it, right? That's easy, right? Yeah. And people have climbed the career ladder just doing that. So it is not about being nice. It really is about doing what's right for the customer, and doing things that are sometimes crazy, laughable. The Amazon, there's a famous story at Amazon that the invention of the recommendation was actually done by a single engineer who couldn't get approval to do it and just did it anyway. And so that one little idea of, you bought this, maybe you'll like to buy this, or this, right? That has generated tens of billions of dollars for Amazon. And that was one engineer operating an environment where people are expected to take risks.
Right. Now, one of the other ones I wanted to come back in that 5 was outcome focus. And you talked about flow, you talked about joy. And these are very highfalutin ideas. Um, the the idea of having a joyful workplace, lovely. Um, but let's say our company, whoever the company is, has just gone through uh, quarantine, pandemic, anxiety. Maybe we're going to go out of business. How do you help them to come back into a state of uh, not only joy but flow? Because I've done. You and I talked about this earlier. That we're both big fans of the Genome Project and the work of Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel, and wonderful, wonderful work. But one of the things that will put people out of flow is this constant sense of, oh my God, right? So walk us through a little bit about that in the context of today and this, the world has been changed. There's no doubt about that. And again, I don't know that that's a bad or a good thing. I just know that it has.
Yeah.
So, we've gone through something the equivalent of a global Amazon,
Yeah.
talking in technology way, that's just only in a healthcare way, and that's impacted businesses globally. So how do we implement this sense of joy now and bring flow to the workplace?
No, for sure. There was a tweet that was going around that I just loved, and it was a poll that asked, what C-level executive was most effective in driving digital transformation? The CEO, the CFO, the CIO, or COVID-19? And I think what it really showed is that, boy, we moved in 2 months. We moved 3 to 5 years in terms of the advancement of digital initiatives, just to empower people to get their daily work done. Everyone in the organization is having to work from home in radically different ways. Boy, I remember reading the letter between AMC Theaters and Universal Pictures about the Trolls movie, right? They went direct to consumer, right? Because they couldn't wait for movie theaters to open. And, talk about a industry that is, being disrupted ahead of schedule. So in the Unicorn Project, one of the things the highest form of praise for me is when someone reads a book and says, "Holy cow, it's like you've been hiding in our building," or "This is me." And one of the things I was really trying to do is show that you could take the top caliber engineer, our protagonist Maxine, right? You put her in a dysfunctional project where she can't get anything done. No matter how good she is like Tom Hanks in the movie Castaway, where he cannot do anything himself, right? He's reliant on nature, and basically none of his goals, dreams, and aspirations can get done when he's stranded on this island. And that is how most engineers and developers feel in technology organizations.
Exactly.
And so it takes months for them to get productive. To get even small things done, they have to take 40 people out to lunch, and this is not where we get a lot of things done, right? As an author, right? As a fellow author, imagine if you had to write a paragraph and you had to call like 20 different people, right? And you had to do that page after page for every paragraph after paragraph. And so I think COVID-19 shows us what we can get done, right? The heroics that are possible when we are willing to break all the rules, right? The fact that you have organizations that can get 80,000 employees all working from home, given only 2 weeks notice. That is a miracle. And that is what your technology organizations are capable, if we can just enable them to do work in a way that is natural to them. And I think that's the big lesson that I'm hoping business leaders take away from the COVID crisis. And if we just do that as a part of our daily work, imagine what would be possible.
Well, I fully agree with you in principle. But psychologically, that's not how we work. So in principle, I fully agree. I'm the one who said since this is that COVID-19, the pandemic, whatever term you want to use, pushed us into the future 3 to 5 years. It made people face, remote work was available before, but most companies were going, well, we can't do that. And now they went, well, if we're going to stay in business, we have to do it. And in 2 weeks, as you said, they did. Now, will some companies disappear under the pressure of that? Absolutely. Will some people rise to the top and do amazing things because of this? Absolutely. Most will be somewhere in the middle and trying to cling to the past while trying to move forward. And you can't step into the next place while holding on to the last place. And that's what most people will do. And that's my challenge to you, Gene, is that as we return to work in whatever form that is, I definitely believe that a much larger portion of the workforce will remain at home. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Somewhere between 40 to 60% over the next 2 years will remain at home. That's going to in fact impact commercial property prices, commercial property values. It means, I predicted in 1989, I predicted that many commercial properties would become rezoned as living accommodation because those buildings will just sit empty otherwise. However, that is you and I being futurists, but the reality is people don't like change. They like things to be the same, and that's not flow either. And that's absolutely not joy. That's comfort and safety, which is different than joy.
Yeah.
So do we need to be in this constant state of threat, i.e. a pandemic, for us to actually embrace technology? Do we have to be in threat of Amazon becoming, Jeff Bezos becoming king of the world? That the only way? I mean, what do you think? You've done so much great research on this, Gene.
Yeah, and I think this is a question so far out of my area of expertise, but I don't think I can advocate that, what we've been going through for the last 2 months, right? This trauma, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any of us would say that we want to encourage a sense of trauma and fear and shock, no. Right? No. But I think what we have shown is even in the most calcified organizations, they're being forced to do things in a way that have never been contemplated, right? In their most and the wildest plans. And I think, and it shows that, even they can operate with this rapid learning dynamic, right? That says, hey, we're doing something that's never been done before with people who have never been trained for this before. I think we are showing that, the heroics that we can unleash within our own organizations. And the word that comes to my mind is the learning dynamic, right? They say it's almost a platitude that the leaders have to be constant learners, but holy cow, I don't think anyone has been challenged to do as much rapid learning than they have in the last couple of months.
Absolutely.
And so if I could wave a magic wand, my hope would be for us to preserve that sense that we need to keep learning, but learning is not just about survival, but this is actually how we win in the marketplace, right? With the way we win in the marketplace is by out learning the competition. And that it doesn't require a global pandemic to have that mindset. And so maybe just taking down one level, that technology leaders use the heroics that have been done to enable all the frontline workers that could only be done through technology. We use that as an example to say, hey, look what we can do if we are freed from the shackles that all the rules and regulations and policies have chained us to. They might have been good 30 years ago, but they are certainly not appropriate now. May that not be appropriate for whatever the new normal is. Mm-hmm. And that business leaders also look at this as not for just how do we maintain operations, but really how do we use this to unleash innovation and to innovate and win in the marketplace. That's my magic wand wish.
Right. When did you actually write this latest book, The Unicorn?
Oh boy, that
project.
I start to finish was a little over 3 years. And
how long ago was it actually finished? When I say that, I'm meaning you handed it off to your publisher.
It's like, boy, I suspect you two have all sort of blanked it out of your memory, that phase. I think it was somewhere in mid-August, 2 weeks late, and we were almost at risk of missing our print run because of delays in the schedule.
A year ago, 2 years ago?
August last year, yeah.
Okay, so obviously, the reason I'm asking you is because obviously in 2019, the world is in a boom. Economically, there's no sign of COVID-19 or anything like that. And now being here in 2020, as we discuss this, do you feel like the book was a little prophetic?
I would never make that claim.
No, but sometimes like I look at some of my books, like I said, stuff I did in 89 is now like, oh, okay. And I look at some of my older books and I'm like, oh, I was really thinking ahead of what I thought I was thinking ahead. Do you see that in your book?
I think what's interesting is that, people who are every board meeting are probably having the same discussion is you came in January 2020 with a plan and whatever that plan was is not relevant today. And so
No,
here's plan B,
right.
right? And they're all having to justify why they think those are good decisions. And a key piece of that is digital. And I think I would like to think that the Unicorn Project does give senior leaders and the people who have to hold them accountable just as a level of a way to become conversant in the terms without having to be a technology leader. And everyone knows that we have to get closer to the customer, that digital is important. So yeah, I feel I'm hoping that the book will provide some tools and maybe even just topics of conversation of people who are really wrestling with these big problems.
Hmm. Do you think you always sort of thought that way, or was there a turning point for you in the way that you think about technology and leadership together? Was there a turning point for you, or did you always kind of think this way?
Oh no! In fact, like you, I love that phrase. You're only as smart as the top five people you hang out with, or you're only as
Mhm.
spiritual or
Yeah.
fit, or
Yeah.
what have you. And over the years, as you know, my the people I admire as they get promoted, as our perspectives change. And I think every year my perspective changes, and I feel like I've never understood or appreciated just how important the job of the leader is, especially at the highest levels of these large companies. And so I feel like I'm very humbled by and very cognizant of how much I don't know. So
Yeah.
I'm a lot of these are very recent aha moments,
Yeah. Of
but
course.
I'm no less excited about them.
What were you like as a kid?
um, what was I like as a kid? I think if I compare me even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, to what I am now, I think I needed validation a lot more. I think like so many people, we spent a lot of our time caring about what other people think. And in fact,
Mhm.
that's what attracted me to research was to be able to stand on a soapbox and say, hey,
These guys think this, so I can think this.
exactly, and I have the data to show it. And I think even some of that need to be a researcher came from this need for validation and and objective evidence, which I think is good. But now I view research as a way to help communicate complex ideas to other people and to confirm deeply held intuitions and experiences that they've had and reveal surprising insights. So I'd like to think I care a lot less about what other people think in my as I'm approaching 50. I certainly hope I can eventually leave that behind.
Are you were you a kid who was kind of like, were you a tech kid, or were you,
Oh, for
you're
sure.
in, yeah.
Oh yeah. I was the kid working late at night. My parents sent me to computer coding camp when I was a little over 10 years old.
Wow.
There was something about working with computers that almost like the stereotype. I just loved the act of creating something and seeing it run. And uh, you know, so definitely sort of that nerd stereotype I very much resonate with.
Yeah, I mean, I got to tell you, just as a little sidebar, that for me, the whole thing is so sci-fi because I'm a little older than you, and I remember, I mean, I can remember having an aunt who was a punch card operator, right? And most people listening go, "What the hell was a punch card operator?" They were computer geeks.
Yes.
They made holes in pieces of paper that told a computer how to work. Back in the day when The Man from Uncle was a TV series, the
Right.
TV series was these giant reels that were on the back end of the CIA building that are now equivalent to about 20% of what's in your iPhone.
That's right.
All of the CIA information was on. It's like, wow, so, this idea of, you being sent to coding camp, like, is this like, did you go in your hovered car? How did you get there?
Oh
It
no,
feels
that was dropped. My mom dropped me off in the her Pontiac Volare, right? It
right.
was surrounded by middle class kids, right?
But it's interesting that it was like, it's that, because as a Gen Xer, which is what you are, that distinction of evolution of
Yeah.
technology that, and because one of the things I talked a lot about is that we are living in a science fiction world of 25 years ago.
Yes.
And because the changes are incremental, we don't really notice, so we go, well, yeah, I have an iPhone, so what? But, it's not that long ago that nobody had a phone. And I remember a movie, which you may or may not know, which was called The Man Who Fell to Earth, starring David Bowie. David Bowie was in that movie, a fantastic movie. And one of the wow points in the movie was he kept taking pictures with a camera that had no film. And everybody was like, wow, that's wild, right? This was before Kodak even had the digital camera that they never used, that put them out of business. Fascinating, so it makes me wonder, Gene, as we talk about this and where we started out actually in this conversation, is how we are moving forward in ways that will be unrecognizable to us in 2020, looking back from 2025 or 2030. I think that, there are so many incremental changes. There are dramatic changes like COVID-19 pushed us, but there are so many incremental changes that a lot of the time we don't notice. And I think that that's the other side of that razor's edge, is that we have to pay attention, because sometimes that can lead us down a very dark road. We need to have the humanity piece, which is what you were talking about in the autonomy and the joy and the flow. And that's the whole, the bigger picture, not just the tech push forward, but the holistic understanding of the humanity of moving forward.
Yeah, without a doubt. So I have, so I'm 48 years old. I have a 12-year-old and two 10-year-olds, and even parenting with, younger children is sometimes a very frightening proposition. I'm not an expert at it. And sometimes I find that very scary, but I think there's so much to be, like you said, so much to be optimistic about. There's so much ways that we can use technology to improve the human condition, to get better outcomes as citizens within every industry we compete in. So when I say that the outcome is undoubtedly, without doubt for me, moral certainty that, by using technology well, we will add trillions of dollars of economic value every year. And that there is no way that those are the things that raise the tide for all boats. And so I'm ultimately very optimistic about what we can do with technology.
Who might we know who's doing a really great job of implementing what it is that you speak about in the book? Is there a company? Is there a leader? Is there someone that was like just a great example of this is what I laid out and this company's doing a great job of it?
Oh yeah, I have hundreds of case studies I've been able to gather from the DevOps enterprise community, but I'll tell you, there was one that really hit home for me, and it came from the UK, and it was from HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue Collection Service. So like the US version of the Internal Revenue Service. Yeah. And so this thing is one of the most massive technology estates on the planet, sometimes neglected, often underfunded. And one of their goals was to just make it so that a single parent could file the taxes online on their phone on their bus ride home. And just having the deputy director of that program describe their vision for it and how this could help the UK citizens, and how they were able to break the rules in a way and do things in a way that had never been done before inside of a government agency. For me, that was an amazing story. And they told the story about how they were able to roll that out safely and improve the lives of their citizens. I just found that to be just one of the most wonderful stories of how technology can be used to help everyday people, right? And this is this is potentially grandma on their phone on a bus. That's what technology is for.
And I think it's particularly interesting as it is in a system that one would think of as being pretty old, rigid, and not being that at all, right?
Right. I think another famous Phoenix project is a Canadian payroll service where it is fraught with problems as they try to replace it, and all sorts of that's almost the exact opposite case, right? Where people now who are supposed to be getting money aren't getting money. People are afraid to quit their jobs or retire. So that's what we want, the exact opposite.
Yeah, exactly. That's fascinating. This has been an amazing conversation, Gene. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You know, I'm going to ask you to share in a moment with our listeners, with our viewers, how they can find out more about you, about your books, and about your resources. But before I do, one of the questions I always like to finish with is to ask, what if there was one practicality of what you've been talking about that you would want our listeners, our viewers, to go away and say, you know what, go do this. This is the thing you need to do in the next 24 hours to move this forward. What would that be?
I would go to a team that you care about, and I would want to get one answer from them. That's two questions. You know, to what, on a scale of 1 to 7, you know, would you recommend your team as a great place to work to your colleagues and friends? So this is a famous employee net promoter score, right? And we found that is a great indicator of whether your team is a great place to work or not. And one of the great questions I would ask next, if this is a technology team, is, you know, on a scale of 1 to 7, to what degree do you fear doing code deployments? In other words, when you push a new feature to production or when you do a change, right? 1 is we have no fear at all. We just did one. We do them every day. 7 is we have existential fear, because we know that every time we push out a change, all hell breaks loose and the world ends and people get fired. And that one question has a tremendous correlation with everything that we've talked about. You know, to what degree is there psychological safety? To what degree is there focus, flow, and joy in the work? To what degree do we prioritize improvement? And I think that's just a great barometer. Oh, and it also impacts, to what degree do people recommend their places to work to friends? So I love these questions because they're so simple. And if you do care about employee engagement and empowering people to get their work done and enabling people to bring their best to work, I think those are 2 simple questions that might lead to some very interesting conversations.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that when I ask for that practical guidance at the end of the show, most often it's a form of a question. It's a form of a question. And when you look at what the form of a question is, it is go communicate with your people, right? It's so often the practicality is go communicate with your people. And to me, that is a statement in and of itself that says, if everybody's practicality is go talk to your people, it's pretty evident that people are not talking to their people, right? Isn't that interesting? It's just like that's what you need to go do. Talk to your people, and moreover, listen when they speak. There's also that major ideal too. Thank you. I
love it.
That's awesome. Please, would you be willing to share with us how our listeners, our viewers, can find out more about you, your books, your resources, all the ways that I know all the great things that you offer?
For sure. I think the best way for people to reach me is on Twitter. I'm Real Gene Kim. So that's Real Gene, Gene, Kim, Kim. And you can find information on what I'm working on at itrevolution.com.
itrevolution.com. Fantastic. Thank you, sir. It has been a pleasure and an honor. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode that you've been listening to or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and our LinkedIn group. Simply go and look for the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or for your organization, simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Because unified meaning, or as we like to call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. We want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can create a unicorn inside of your organization that is not what you usually think of, but actually starts with these 5 principles laid out in this book. I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to employ it into everything that you're doing. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business your life, your leadership impact. And I am out. And for you, dear listener, remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode that you've been listening to or any past episodes inside of our Facebook and our LinkedIn group. Simply go and look for the Leadership and Loyalty Podcast. It doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or for your organization, simply go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Because unified meaning, or as we like to call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. We want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Until next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can create a unicorn inside of your organization that is not what you usually think of, but actually starts with these 5 principles laid out in this book. I encourage you to read it. I encourage you to employ it into everything that you're doing. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, your leadership impact. And I am out.